This time we're stepping into the era which is the least represented on this series, that being the GX era, as we're taking a look at Gravekeepers. An archetype kinda out of nowhere if you ask me, because they were used by one of their monsters known as the Gravekeepers Chief. Yeah, that Gravekeepers are one of those archetypes such as Dark Scorpions and Ojamas and even Crystal Beast, whose monsters are actually monster spirits, thus forming a character. Yubel is the best example of this, which I can how I can explain this to you. But anyway, Gravekeepers, well, they were out of nowhere, but they were actually meta relevant for quite a decent amount of time, because there actually wasn't a time where they weren't meta relevant, because they are what we saw called the anti-meta deck, since they lock out the opponent's graveyard. And yeah, since graveyard has become a second hand this day in this day and age, yeah, Gravekeepers suddenly got a whole lot of boost in relevance. And anyway, let's see how good they are, and start with our first monster, that being the Charm of SHABTI. During either player's turn, you can discard this card until the end phase. Gravekeepers monster you control cannot be destroyed by battle. I mean, it is decent battle protection, but you don't tend to run this because this sounds vaguely useful in the right situation, and yeah, it's not that good if you ask me. It's kind of clunky if you ask me. It's not searchable by the archetype, and yeah, it can be really bricky sometimes. So if you want to run this, run at least one. Well, run one at max for style points at least. Now the next monster is actually a very old card, that being the Cat of Ill Omen. Yeah, I remember this guy. Anyway, it's a level 2 with a flip effect. Select one trap card from your deck and place it on the top of your deck. If NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can add that selected trap card to your hand instead. Yeah, you might remember this guy from the age-old meta when searching out battle traps was all the rage, and NECROVALLEY, yeah, that's the archetypal field spell, quite a famous one and we'll get to that later. So yeah, this thing, yeah, it's horrendously slow and outdated, and you should never ever bother running it, because Gravekeepers do not have that many traps that are worth running in the archetype, so yeah. Next up is an Owl of Luck, another level 2, also with a flip effect. Select one field spell card from your deck and place it on the top of your deck. If NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can add the selected field spell card from your deck to your hand instead. Well, basically this was supposed to be the spell version of a Cat of Ill Omen, but it only searches field spells for whatever reason. And if you already control NECROVALLEY, then you wouldn't have the need for any other field spells. In fact, why run any other field spell other than NECROVALLEY and Gravekeepers? But oh boy, terraforming is now semi-limited, so splash this thing in for some massive consistency boosting. Yeah, no, I'd rather run 2 terraforming than 3 of these. Yeah, I ignore this. But now, actually getting into the Gravekeeper monster lineup. First off, we're starting off with Gravekeeper's Recruiter, a level 3, and when this card that you control is sent to your graveyard, add one Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand. This is a bit, how should I say, on the weird side, since it looks up the monster's defense points, except as in it doesn't focus on attacks, which most of these searchers do. But regardless, you run this guy at 3 because the defensive values are usually around this 1500 defense or less, and this guy can even search out himself. So yeah, Gravekeeper's Recruiter, you should definitely run 3 of these. Their next level 3 is Gravekeeper's Priest. If this card is summoned, you can target one level 4 Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, special summon it in face up the attack position or face down defense position. This effect cannot be negated by NECROVALLEY, and you can only use this effect of Gravekeeper's Priest once per turn. Yeah, the NECROVALLEY effect negation thing might sound weird to you if you don't know anything about Gravekeepers, but yeah, we'll get to that. But yeah, as this thing, yeah, I don't know why it's only limited to level 4s, but works regardless. Running two or three of these is never a bad option. And I would appreciate if it was level 4 or lower, since this thing can be a good rank 3 fodder for Dante as an example. So yeah, really good card. Their next card is Gravekeeper's Priestess. Yeah, adding S to the end is really good. But anyway, while there is no face-up field spell card, the field is treated as NECROVALLEY. All Gravekeeper's monsters gain 200 attack and defense. Well, the attack and defense boosting is irrelevant, but the first effect is, as of this day, I am not sure, but I think it is, as of this day, the only card in the entire game who has a monster effect that copies the effect of a field spell. Wow! I've never heard of anything like it since I didn't come across Gravekeepers. Oh yeah, when I heard about this thing, I was, wow, that's a unique effect. But anyway, yeah, you run three NECROVALLEY in all time. We'll get to that as well, and you run at least 2 of these. So yeah, good card. The next monster is Gravekeeper's Curse. When this card is summoned, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. No, don't run this. Their next monster is Gravekeeper's Nobleman. When this card you control is destroyed by battle with an opponent's attacking monster and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon 1 Gravekeeper's monster from your deck in face down defense position, except Gravekeeper's Nobleman. You always run this thing at 3, and there is actually a really nice target for this thing since it summons in face down defense position. Since yeah, Gravekeepers, since they are from the age-old GX era, have quite an abundance of flip effect monsters. Only few of them are relevant, and one of them is one of those decent targets for it. But wait, there's actually another level 3, quite a ominous one, that being Gravekeeper's VASSAL. Any battle damage this card inflicts to your opponent is treated as effect damage instead. I have literally no idea what this effect is supposed to accomplish. It doesn't synergize with its archetype, it's just pure rancid shit. In other words, don't run it. Their next monsters are level 4, that being Gravekeeper's Commandant. You can discard this card to the graveyard to add 1 NECROVALLEY from your deck to your hand. So yeah, this is one of those level 4 field searches with beefy stats. However, this one has 300 less attack points than usually desired, so... But still though, since terraforming is limited and NECROVALLEY is such an important set piece, I'd advise running at least 2 of these. So yeah, good card. Their next monster is Gravekeeper's Assailant. When this card declares an attack while NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can target 1 monster with your opponent controls, change that target's battle position. And the ideal thing is to use this to switch something to defense mode and run over something with gargantuan stats, but other than that, this effect has no literal purpose whatsoever. So Gravekeeper's Assailant is a really questionable card to consider running. Their next monster is also a really good one, that being Gravekeeper's Ambusher. When this card is flipped face up, you can target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard, place that target to the bottom of their deck. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard after being flipped face up, you can target 1 NECROVALLEY card in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. This card's effects cannot be negated by the effect of NECROVALLEY. Well, this is actually another decent target for the Nobleman, and if you're wondering why the NECROVALLEY card instead of NECROVALLEY as in the field spell, well, there are actually support cards which share the name NECROVALLEY in the name. So yeah, Gravekeeper's Ambusher is really always ran at 3, since it can also disrupt the opponent's graveyard and remove really good combo pieces from their graveyard by placing them on the top on the bottom of the deck, which is not very searchable unless you have the proper materials. So yeah, Gravekeeper's Ambusher is always ran at 3. Their next monster is Gravekeeper's Cannon Holder, and you contribute 1 Gravekeeper's monster to accept Gravekeeper Cannon Holder and inflict 700 damage to your opponent. So this is supposed to be like an archetypal version of Cannon Soldier FTK, except this one has the audacity of not being able to tribute himself in order to apply the effect. But yeah, other than that, he has the higher burn damage, and yeah, whether you run this guy or not is whether you like the Cannon Soldier FTK a lot and you're building your entire Gravekeeper deck around this guy. But if you're planning on building an actual versatile Gravekeeper deck with using their effects to what they're known for, you avoid this guy because, yeah. Alright, their next monster is Gravekeeper's Descendant, and you can tribute one other Gravekeeper's monster to target one card your opponent controls and destroy the target. Mind you, this isn't once per turn. Yeah, if it wasn't so easily to run over this thing, this would be quite a decent card. So yeah, you can probably say that this is an archetypal Worm King. And yeah, if it had higher stats, it would be a lot better. But as it is now, it's a questionable one-off if you should ever consider running it. Their next monster is Gravekeeper Heretic. This card on the field is unaffected by all other card effects as long as NECROVALLEY is also on the field. Wow, this is actually quite nice, but I would have liked this effect better if it was on one of their boss monsters, which we'll get into later. And those aren't quite the best ones around, but as it is now, this thing is actually quite a 3-off staple, no matter the build, as it's a really good card, no question about it. And NECROVALLEY is very easily accessible, so yeah. And their next monster is Gravekeeper's Guard with a flip effect. Target one monster your opponent controls, return that target to the hand. Ignore this and run compulsory, moving on. Their next monster is a really decent target for Nobleman, that being Gravekeeper's Spy. Also has a flip effect, and when it's flipped, special summon one Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck. Yeah, this is actually a really good effect since it can help out with field swarming and searching more Gravekeepers out. And you can also this card was actually really popular in the meta where the monsters with above 2000 attack weren't very popular. So you attack into this, it survives, and then it summons another one of itself to protect you. But today it can be used as rank 4 fodder, well, any Xyz fodder as of now, and it's a genuinely really good card, and it's usually run at 2 or 3. Alright, their next monster is Gravekeeper's Spear Soldier, and if this card attacks a defense position monster and inflicts piercing damage to your opponent. Yeah, just ignore this. Its piercing has fallen out of relevance since, I don't know, since I was like 7 or 8, and that was 9 years ago. Alright, their next monster is Gravekeeper's Watcher. During either player's turn, when your opponent activates a spell or trap card or monster effect that can make them discard a card, when it resolves, you can send this card from your hand to your graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. I mean, you could use this as a side option during Dark Worlds, but as of generally playing Gravekeepers, you should tend to avoid this thing because it's insanely specific. So yeah, cite it if you're playing against Dark Worlds, but avoid it anywhere else. And their next monster is one of their newer monsters and one of my personal favorites, that being Gravekeeper's Spiritualist. If NECROVALLEY is on the field, you can fusion summon one spellcaster fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material, including this card. You can only use this effect once per turn. And yeah, this is actually really decent effect since Gravekeeper's got a fusion monster in the Soul Fusion set. And it was kind of weird that they didn't have a fusion since this is the GX era we're talking about, and polymerization was the main thing about that anime, even though most of the GX fusions sucked. But yeah, this is a really good card, and their fusion monster is absolutely insane, so you should always max out on this thing, that being always rank 3 of these, and this artwork is absolutely fabulous. Alright, getting to the guy who actually played Gravekeepers, we're stumbling upon their first tribute monster, that being Gravekeeper's Chief. You can only control one face-up Gravekeeper's Chief. Your graveyard is unaffected by NECROVALLEY. When this card is tribute summoned, you can target one Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, special summon that target. I mean, there are several cards which are unaffected by NECROVALLEY, and there are better revival options than having this thing being tribute summoned with stats that are considered fantastic on a level 4. So yeah, Gravekeeper's Chief is tend to be avoided when building a Gravekeeper's deck. Their next monster is a level 6 Gravekeeper's Shaman. This card gains 200 defense for each Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard. Negate all monster effects that activate in the graveyard except Gravekeeper's monsters. While NECROVALLEY is on the field, your opponent cannot activate field spell cards. Also, field spell cards cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Well, this thing is actually quite decent since prevents activation from graveyard, which is a huge deal nowadays since there's a bunch of floating in the game. And yeah, and also you tend to play this thing in defense since it gains defense points and it has really good protection. Well, it gives protection and it prevents the opponent from activating their own field spell. But yeah, this thing is usually run at once its set rotation is kind of a thing already. But yeah, you run at least one of these and one set rotation to back this thing up. And their first boss monster is Gravekeeper's Visionary, their first 2 tribute monster. And you can tribute summon this card by tributing one Gravekeeper's monster. This card gains 200 attack for each Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard. If this face-up card would be destroyed, you can discard one Gravekeeper's monsters instead. So yeah, this is supposed to be a self-attack boosting beat stick with tolerable protection at that, but other than that, it's kind of sort of decent. It's nothing too spectacular, but you don't run any more than one of these. As of their next monster, that being Gravekeeper's Oracle, you can tribute 3 monsters or one Gravekeeper's monster to tribute summon but not set this card. When this card is tribute summoned, you can activate any of these effects and resolve it in sequence, up to the number of Gravekeeper's monsters tribute for its summon. If it was tributed by tributing one monster, this card gains attack equal to the combined levels of all monsters tribute for its tribute summon had on the field times 100. Destroy all set monsters your opponent controls. All monsters your opponent controls lose 2000 attack and defense. Well, yeah, this is their as they're called ultimate boss monster, but well, the only things decent about this thing are for 1 monster and 3 monsters of tribute effect, while set monsters aren't going to be very much present by the time you summon this thing. And yeah, your base stats are really pathetic at that, and Gravekeeper's Visionary is basically a better version of this if you crave a 2 tribute monster. And yeah, those were all the main deck monsters, and now time for their final monster, their fusion monster, that being Gravekeeper's ESPERA. Requires any 2 Gravekeeper's monsters and gains attack and defense equal to the total original levels of the material used for its fusion summon time 100. While NECROVALLEY is on the field, this card and the card in your field zone cannot be destroyed by card effects. During your main phase, you can add 1 Gravekeeper's monster or 1 NECROVALLEY card from your deck to your hand during the end phase of this turn. You can only use this effect of Gravekeeper's ESPERA once per turn. Yeah, I said earlier that this thing was insane. This thing has a once per turn search effect that searches out most of your archetype. Wow, and it has incredible protection at that, and combined with some other text of Gravekeeper's cards, it is a really formidable boss monster, and I really like that Gravekeeper's got it. So this is the prime reason why you always run 3 Spiritualists, and you always run 3 of these. Yeah, that's a really good card. And now we've been rambling about this field spell for a really long time. Now it's finally here. NECROVALLEY, the archetypal field spell. All of Gravekeeper's monsters gain 500 attack and defense. Cards in the graveyard cannot be banished. Negate any card effect that would move a card from the graveyard to a different place. Negate any card effect that changes types or attributes in the graveyard. Alright, so yeah, this is... Now we actually see the prime gameplay gimmick of Gravekeepers. That is locking out the opponents from using the graveyard, and yeah, the only Gravekeepers can use the graveyard. So yeah, this is it also has a tolerable attack boost for the era, and yeah, this thing is also seeing play in other builds focused on locking out the opponent's graveyard, and because of this, how good this field spell can be, I suggest taking one Malefic Stardust Dragon to protect it, or the original Stardust Dragon if you're building a synchro-based Gravekeeper's deck. So yeah, really good card. Their next card is the continuous spell Gravekeeper's Servant, where your opponent must send one card from the top of their deck to the graveyard to declare an attack. Well, this was actually quite a famous card since it was used in the age-old meta where milling was harmful to the opponent in conjunction with Don Zalug and Needleworm. So yeah, if you're... it works with the intended nature of the deck, and you should run at least 2 or 3 of these, since you could easily make a deck out, a Gravekeeper deck, if you put your heart into it. And their next spell card is Gravekeeper's STELE. Target 2 Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, add those targets to your hand. This effect cannot be negated by the effect of NECROVALLEY. Basically an archetypal dark factory of mass production, and that's as far as it goes. I think you're actually better off using Soul Charge. Oh wait, Soul Charge is and you cannot use Soul Charge because it is affected by NECROVALLEY. I'm ashamed. Alright, so yeah, you should run at least one of these. Next up is a continuous spell, Hidden Temples of NECROVALLEY. Activate only if both a Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY are on the field. Neither player can special summon monsters except Gravekeeper's monsters. If either a Gravekeeper's monster or NECROVALLEY is not on the field, destroy this card. This is actually a pretty legit good lockdown card, since it prevents both players from summoning Gravekeeper's monsters, and by the time you actually want to activate this effect, you actually have a pretty formidable board with some Xyz monsters and maybe some Synchro monsters and basically any extra deck monsters that you might want at this point. Make sure ESPERA is on the field because by the time you use this effect, because it is one of the best archetypal lockdown cards I have ever seen. Alright, their next spell card is actually limited as of now, that being Royal Tribute. If you control NECROVALLEY, both players discard any monsters in their hands. So yeah, you basically empty out your hand with monsters and then use this to discard all monsters your opponent controls into the graveyard to prevent them from making any plays. So yeah, you always run this, no matter the build. And yeah, that was their final spell card. Their first trap card is Rite of Spirit. Target 1 Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard, special summon the target. This card's activation and effect are unaffected by NECROVALLEY. So yeah, an archetypal monster reborn, what's not to like? You always run 3 of these since it's a really nice recovery for the archetype. And their next trap card is a counter trap Imperial Tombs of NECROVALLEY. When a spell card, trap card, or monster effect is activated while both Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY are on the field, negate the activation. If you do, destroy it. You can only activate 1 Imperial Tombs of NECROVALLEY once per turn. Archetypal countering that works on spells, traps, and monster effects, and what's not to like. It's not hard to have a single Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY on the field, so yeah. Max out on this thing. My recommendation is at least 2 or 3 of these. And their final card is Sanctuary of NECROVALLEY. While a Gravekeeper's monster and NECROVALLEY are on the field, all monsters your opponent controls lose 500 attack and defense. Once per turn during the main phase, if you do not control a card in your field zone, you can activate 1 NECROVALLEY from your hand or graveyard. If this card is destroyed by your opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can set 1 NECROVALLEY spell or trap from your deck except NECROVALLEY. Well, with this many ways to search out NECROVALLEY, there isn't actually any reason to run terraforming anymore. Well, and this thing is also a continuous spin trap, so yeah, it's actually really decent, and its floating effect is actually really good since it can search out any NECROVALLEY spell or trap, and the most prominent one you want to search is Hidden Tombs, the lockdown card. And yeah, those were all the Gravekeepers, and now it's time for the grades. Consistency is really there. A lot of monsters have a lot of searching capabilities. Ambusher, Recruiter, and Nobleman also work. Spy, especially since he is actually ridiculous for its time, especially. So yeah, consistency is certainly there, and I would actually dare to give it a 3 out of 3 there. Now power aspect is usually low around these parts because that purely depends on running their boss 2 tribute monsters, and Esper's attack is not very tolerable. Most of their power aspect is really low since almost all of their monsters don't have attack points over 2000. So yeah, that's a 1 out of 3 there. Comeback ability is certainly there, but because of NECROVALLEY, it might not always be there as you want it to most of the time, since the best comeback you could ever make is top decking Soul Charge, and Soul Charge tends to be negated by NECROVALLEY if you have it on the field. But there are much more recovery options here than I ever imagined, so I'll give it a 2 out of 3 there. Protection, I mean, the Shaman is a thing, and the Archetype has quite a few cards that can save them from being targeted or destroyed. Heretic and Esper, and then having the best protection of them all. But we're talking about some very specific monsters, so 1 out of 3 I will have to say. And as for the versatility, because of NECROVALLEY's insane splash ability, I would be obligated to give this a 3 out of 3 because these things are focused on shutting down meta decks which utilize Graveyard to its full potential, and yeah, I think these guys will never ever be out of the meta for any longer periods of time. So how good they are and what they do. How good they do it. So yeah, as of the Gravekeeper's recent support, well, I don't know when it will be imported to the TCG. I hope it's pretty soon because yeah, Gravekeeper Spiritualist is absolutely ridiculous, and Esper as well. So yeah, I'd really like to see how Gravekeepers evolve from this point on. With that said, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, work and updates, comment, like and subscribe, and as usual I'll upload the next vid whenever I can. See you all, have a good day, and peace.